That's me, getting beaten up. Everybody was awakened by this footage.
These images went viral a year ago, when the world was just beginning to learn about the anti-government protests in Georgia. Thousands took to the streets, coming up against the might of a state willing to use extreme measures to hold on to power.
თუ ხდება შეტევა და შტურმი ხდება, შეგიძლია გამოიყენო ერთდროულად გაზიც, წყალიც და სხვა სპეცსაშუალებების.
Georgian police have used water cannons on demonstrators in Tbilisi.
We investigate what exactly is being fired from these water cannons.
იდგა რაღაცა მძაფრი სული, რომელიც სულქვას აძლიერებდა.
And we ask if the government has gone so far as to use chemical weapons against its own people.
It is certainly not a chemical that I want thrown out to the masses during protests. That is exceedingly dangerous.
Populations should never be subjected to experiments. This is absolutely in violation of human rights law.
And we hear from former insiders to find out who's orchestrating the police response and turning the country towards Russia.
ესეთი ხდება დღეს ხდება მოსკოვში, ესე ხდება ბელარუსიაში, ესე ხდება გროზნოში, ესე ხდება ავტორიტარულ დიქტატურულ ქვეყნებში.
This is the story of a year of dissent, a year of fighting for the future of Georgia.
When I'm watching this video, I don't feel like I'm there. I feel very dissociated from this person who is in that video.
It was Viad's first time at the rally on Rustaveli Avenue. In the early hours of the morning, he was attacked by riot police officers.
I kind of remember the eyes and the way he looked at me, angry look that this guy gave me. I'll never forget that. Next thing I know, and everybody is beating me from all around me with their feet. And I was saying, please don't beat me. And I remember just say it one time or maybe two, I don't know. And then I passed out.
Zviad suffered a concussion and required facial reconstruction.
This experience was definitely life-changing.
These images from the streets of Georgia's capital, Tbilisi, made global headlines. The world has just learned what brought so many out in protest. It all started on this day. At the end of last year, Georgia's newly elected government made its first momentous decision.
Last week, the Prime Minister said he would put European Union accession talks on hold despite polls suggesting widespread support for membership.
Many fear this political decision is pulling the country, a former Soviet republic, closer to Russia. Located where Europe and Asia meet, Georgia is a country of 4 million people bordering Russia. Since the war in 2008, 2 of its regions have been occupied by Russian forces. Since then, Georgia had been on a path to join the European Union. The ruling party, the Georgian Dream, had initially promised to deliver it, but now seems to be siding with Russian interests in the region.
We, in fact, have the pro-Russian government, and they have all the resources and tools to stop Georgia and stop Georgia's integration into the EU. It's about Russia's attitude not to allow countries around them to enter European Union.
By midnight, tens of thousands of people are out in the streets in what starts as a peaceful protest. Things escalate when the protesters angrily demand the resignation of the government. The ruling party had won a sweeping victory in the general election. But the scale of it prompted allegations of fraud. At the time, the European Parliament called for new elections due to serious electoral violations.
Is your party intimidating voters?
There were lots of reports of election fraud.
Irregularities happen everywhere, in every country. If you look at the reports in different country, international observers' reports, there are many irregularities.
The government had planned for this. They call in the riot police to man the streets, backed up by 5-ton water cannons. In response, the protesters show no sign of backing down. On Rustaveli Avenue, on that cold November night, the police are about to use measures that few had anticipated.
Georgian police have used water cannons on demonstrators in Tbilisi.
და მანქანა რო დავინახეთ რომ მოიყვა ეს ყოჭავლის იჩვეული ვიყავი და რა უნდა იყოს ახალი მაგრამ იდგა რაღაცა მძაფრისული რომელიც აი სუნთქვას აძლიერებდა.
Gela Hasaya, a political activist, has been at the forefront of many anti-government protests for years. But this time, when faced with the water cannons, he quickly realizes there's something different about them.
წყალში იყო გარეული რაღაც ნივთიერება, რომელიც დასვლებასთან ერთად გწვავდა. თან მაშინ დაზიანებები მქონდა სახეზე პოლიციელების მხრიდან მოყოლებული და ამ დაზიანებებზე ეს რაღაცა გარეული წყალი რო ხვდებოდა, შემდეგ იწვევდა უფრო დიდ ტყივილს.
Many demonstrators like Gela start experiencing worrying symptoms: vomiting, shortness of breath, skin irritation.
ეს ადგილი მქონდა ყველაზე მეტად დამწვარი, ალბათ ვიცი აქ მომხდა ყველაზე მეტი, კანის აკერცვა, რაღაცა არანორმალური ქავილები. მან დამიდასტურა რომ ეს არის რაღაცა უცხო ნივთიერებებისგან გამოწვეული რაღაც კანის პრობლემა. ეს რაღაცა ერთი თვე ეს პრობლემა მქონდა.
Many are left wondering what was being sprayed on them. And behind the scenes, some are already gathering evidence to find out. It's all part of a severe police response to the protesters.
აი ირგვლივ როგორც კი ქუჩებისკენ ვიხედებოდი, ყველგან მსგავსი სცენა იყო. ყველგან ვიღაცას უთხრამდნენ, ვისაც კი დაეწეოდნენ, ყველას სასტიკად ცემდნენ. თან ესმოდა ქალების დამწერული ხმა, რომ ჩემი შვილია, ნუ უტყამ. ეს ყველაფერი ძალიან მძიმე მოსასმენი იყო.
The protesters resist the police with fireworks and lasers. Government-friendly media describe them as violent radicals backed by foreign funding who've injured dozens of officers.
პრემიერ-მინისტრმა დღეს კიდევ ერთხელ შეაფასა ირაკლი კობახიძე ამბობს, რომ ქვეყანაში კანონის და სამართლის უზენაესობა დაცულია.
მითი იმის თაობაზე, რომ ქუჩებში ამ ერთი კვირის განმავლობაში ძალადობდნენ გულწრფელი ახალგაზრდები თავიდან ბოლომდე დაიმსხვრა. ეს იყო თავიდან ბოლომდე პარტიულად მართული და დაორგანიზებული ძალადობრივი დაჯგუფებები.
Police forces sometimes deploy water cannons up to 8 times a night, often without warning. An increasing number of people report experiencing strange reactions to the water.
Even small sprinkles got on your skin, you were feeling a lot of pain.
Konstantin Chekhanashvili, a pediatric doctor, is out on Rustaveli with his brother from day one. They've been involved in anti-government rallies for years. He also experiences firsthand the effect of the water cannons.
It has huge sprinkle line of sight, but it has also direct line of sight, right? Even if sprinkles got on your skin, you could feel it burning, and if you're without a mask, it would feel as if you were pepper sprayed.
And how long did it last for?
I couldn't wash it off, so yeah, I don't know, 4 days.
There's mounting pressure on the authorities to release details of what's in the water cannons.
თუმცა ყველა კონკრეტულ საშუალებაზე მე ხა ვერ მოგაწვით ინფორმაციას, იმიტომ რომ ეს ხანგრძლივად გრძელდებოდა.
Konstantin decides to carry out a medical investigation to see if any symptoms have lasted longer than a month. The study involves nearly 350 protesters exposed to tear gas and the unknown chemical in the water cannons. Although it's difficult to pinpoint which caused specific symptoms. 40% say they experienced skin irritation like Gela. But this wasn't the worst of it.
2 in 3 who had cough, 1 in 2 had shortness of breath. High blood pressure was identified in 283 people. Heart palpitations was identified in 150 people. When someone comes up to you and tells you that they have some type of symptoms, that's an anecdotal evidence, right? So we were trying to collect actual data that can be quantified, and we could see what type of symptoms are there.
The information that there could have been some sort of a mixture of the unknown chemical irritants with the water came from the early days of the protest.
Tamara Niani runs the Human Rights Abuse Unit at the Georgian Young Lawyers Association. She and her team have been hands-on in documenting the emerging allegations of an unknown chemical being used at the protests and of allegations of police abuse.
მანქანები არის, რასაც ვაკვირდებით, ხო, თაზო ეგრე არის, ან თეთრი და მუქი ფერის, ხო, შავი ან მუქი ფერის სამარშრუტო ტაქსები.
They gather testimonies from over 100 protesters. Their evidence suggests that the unknown chemical was being deployed throughout the first week of the protests.
There are thousands of people who were targeted by the chemical irritants, unknown chemical irritants to public. This mixture also show the intensity and the aim of the Ministry of Interior Affairs to disperse the rally, to also have the chilling effect on the protesters.
From the outset, Tamar's organization requests that the government release the name of the chemicals. The medical community too are alarmed, and at the same time, they write a petition demanding to be told what is being used. No one is getting answers.
My role is to investigate allegations of torture and other ill treatment wherever they may occur.
Alice Edwards has been closely examining the situation in Georgia.
This is not the military. This is in a civilian setting where ordinary people are taking to the streets, and they have a right as citizens to know what the law enforcement equipment is that's in that country. The state should be entirely transparent about whether they are using water cannons infused with different chemicals, as well as what those chemicals are. And that's not just for a broader democratic and transparency and legality reason, but it also allows individuals to take the decision about their own health and whether they're going to be in harm's way on the day.
There's no explicit international law to ban the use of chemicals in water cannons, but it's not recommended. If used, the effects would have to be temporary. While we still don't know what the longer-term effects of the water cannons were, it was clear hundreds of people were injured by the police. We wanted to identify who was responsible. When journalists on the ground try to find out, they are attacked by masked men, many who look like police officers. They are the so-called Titushki. These are suspected members of organized crime alleged to be associated with a governing party. The police officers themselves are dressed in a similar way. Many are in plain black uniforms, their faces covered, and none of them wear identification numbers. But this woman does know who many of them are. She was one of them. Tamta Rekveshvili is a former police officer. She is about to join one of the rallies.
რა თქმა უნდა, შემხედრიან ჩემი თანამშრომლებიც. ნიღბითაც მინახავს და უნიღბოთაც. და ხა წლები რომ აქ ადამიანთა ერთად ნამუშევარი თვალებითაც ვიცნი. როგორც პოლიციელი ვერ წარმოვიდგენდი, რომ პოლიციას ასეთი რამ შეეძლო. ვაი გონწასულ ადამიანს რომ კიდევ წიხლს მიაყოლებ ერთს კი არა ორს. იქ უკვე რა პოლიციელობაზეა საუბარი, საერთოდ ადამიანი არ ხარ. შენ ხარ საზოგადოების მტერი ეგეთ დროს.
Tamta is one of the very few officers publicly criticizing the system. She spent 7 years as a police officer. Her last role was as a senior detective investigating crimes against minors. She quit in spring 2024 after an earlier violent protest.
ეს არის პოლიციის აკადემია, რო დავასრულე. ამ დროს მეგონა, რომ ძალიან ბევრი ცვლილების მოხდენა შემეძლო. და მე ძალიან კარგად მახსოვდა ჩემი ფიცი. პოლიციის ფიცი, იმიტომ რომ ეს არ არის სისტემის ერთგულება. ეს არის ხალხის სამსახურში ყოფნა.
But it's the riot police, the Special Tasks Department, taking the lead, night after night. Its officers are known as Robocops, and they're the main perpetrators of violence. These videos, shared exclusively with the BBC, are filmed by the riot police. They are near Parliament, waiting for orders, while recording the protesters, some of whom are aggressive. The riot police officers are heard swearing back at them. They're also heard shouting rape and death threats at the demonstrators. The riot police's commander, Zviad Harasishvili, nicknamed Hareba, is hands-on directing the crackdown each night. Before long, every protester knows his name.
პირდაპირ გადიოდა კადრები, ხარება, როგორ აგინებდა ხმის გამაძლიერებლით აქციის მონაწილეებს, ასევე როგორ ცემდა გაკავებულ ადამიანებს, რომლებიც მას მიჰგვარეს.
Hareba has led the Special Tasks Department for almost 6 years. It's meant to be an elite unit that's been trained by European and American forces. Hareba appears to share the government's view that the protesters have an LGBT agenda pushed by the West. Tamta says most of her former colleagues cut contact with her after quitting her job.
მე ვგიშდებოდი ფორუმაზე. არ ვიცი მინდა თუ არა რომ მეცვას. რაც წამოვედი პოლიციიდან, რადგან ესე ცუდი განწყობებით გამომაცილეს და ერთგვარად მოღალატე გავხდი სისტემის, აქეთ ამ მხრიდან გაუმართლებელია ეს მუშაობაც და სიჩუმეც.
More than 500 people are detained during the first weeks of the protests. Many of those arrested accuse the police of ill treatment and torture in detention. No police officer is held accountable.
The letter I sent to the Georgian authorities focused primarily on the excessive use of force and the very large number of individuals who were arrested and detained, who were beaten and subject to other violence at the hands of public authorities. What was particularly worrying to me was the general sense of the police being able to use any means that they wished on those days. Regrettably, until now, they have not replied.
Early on in the protests, the government announced they would end the large-scale police response. But the protests and the violence continued. For one man, though, this was indefensible.
შესაბამისად, ორი ვარიანტი რჩებოდა, ან უნდა იქ დარჩენილიყავი და ყვლელად ქცეულიყავი, ან უნდა ქვეყანიდან წამოსულიყავი.
We tracked down a former high-level member of the police who knows how the system works and is now prepared to reveal who was giving the orders.
ჩემი მოტივი თქვენთან ურთიერთობის თანამშრომლობის ძირითადად არის ის, რომ როგორც საქართველოში, ისე საქართველოს ფარგლებს გარეთ საერთაშორისო საზოგადოებამ გაიგოს რეალურად რა ხდება საქართველოში მიმდინარე პროცესებზე.
Irakli Shaishmelashvili is a soldier by trade. he fought in the Georgian War against Russia. He was also deployed in Afghanistan alongside NATO troops. 6 years ago, he took on the role of head of planning for the riot police. He was the face of the unit. Irakli was in charge of directing resources during the protests, including the unit's 3,000 officers. On the day the protests began, Irakli's role was to develop a crowd management plan.
28-ში როცა დირექტორის მოადგილემ დამიძახა და დამავალა გეგმის მომზადება, ძალიან აღელვებული იყო თვითონ ის პიროვნებაც, ანუ სრული გამოძახება მოახდინეს. ანუ შეთავაზება თავიდან იყო საუბარი, რომ მხოლოდ დაუშვათ დაცული და დაუცველი ქვედანაყოფები, რომლებიც უზრუნველყოფენ აქციის მშვიდობიან გარემოში ჩატარებას. 2300 კაცის მობილიზება მოახდინა მარტო განსაკუთრებულ დავალებათა დეპარტამენტმა იმ დღეს 6 წლის მტკორცნი მანქანა გაიყვანეს. იმაში უნდა გქონდეს წინსწრები ინფორმაცია, რომ დაუშვათ რაღაცა იგეგმება, დაუშვათ შეიძლება პარლამენტში შეჭრა მოხდეს, შეიძლება რაღაც, ანუ არაფერი მსგავსი ინფორმაცია არ იყო. ანუ ამათი გათვლა იყო, რომ ამ ხალხის მიმართ მოეკლათ, ანუ ამ ხალხში, ანუ მიდგომა შინაგან საქმეთა სამინისტროს იყო შიშის დათესვა.
Irakli says he suggested minimal intervention, but the response had already been decided. His advice was being ignored. He watched events unfold from the police command center and didn't like what he saw.
ანუ ძნელია, იცი, უყურო მსგავს ვიდეოებს და ემოციის გარეშე გაატარო. აქციები დამბრუნდებოდნენ, ბედნიერები იყვეხნიდნენ, რომ აი თურმე რამდენი ადამიანი დააკავეს, რამდენი ადამიანი ცემეს და მე ერთი სული და ერთი მოლოდინი პრემია როდეს ჩაერიცხებათ. ეს იყო სიბინძურე. ის მსგავსი დღეს არ ვიცი ახლა რასაც ცდილობდი რომ მომეძებნა, ესეთი ხდება დღეს ხდება მოსკოვში, ესე ხდება ბელარუსიაში, ესე ხდება გროზნოში, ესე ხდება ავტორიტარულ დიქტატორულ ქვეყნებში.
Irakli describes the chain of command. It ran directly from the top of the government, the Minister of Internal Affairs, Vakhtang Gomelauri, through to Khareba, the man in charge of the riot police on a day-to-day basis. Here, they are both showing the Prime Minister around the base of the Special Tasks Department.
აქციების დროს ნიღბებში შავი ფორმები ვისაც აცვიათ, მოქალაქეებს ვისაც სცემენ, აკავებენ, უსწორდებიან, ყველა არის ეგენი არიან ხარებას ნდობით აღჭურვილი პირები. ეს ყველაფერი ემსახურება, რომ ბატონ ხარებას მოაწონონ თავი. ხარება გომელაურს აწონებს თავს. ის არის ერთი უბრალოდ რიგითი შემსრულებელი, რომელსაც დაავალეს ეს ბინძური საქმეები წყლის ჭავლის მანქანებში შესაბამისი ქიმიური ნივთიერებების შერევა და შემდგომ წყლის ჭავლის მანქანის გამოყენებაზე გადაწყვეტილებას იღებს მინისტრი, მინისტრის მოადგილე, აი ესეთი ბინძური ჯაჭვი არის შეკრული.
We don't know for sure who gave the order to deploy water cannons mixed with chemicals. Irakli quits his job on day 5 of the protests and flees Georgia with his family. He resigns after watching the footage of his colleagues beating Zviad.
ეს ბიჭი არის, მე სახის ზოლები ქონდა ჩამტრეული. კი, ბოლო წვეთი იყო და კიდევ ერთხელ ვიძახი, რომ ძალიან უნანობ, რატომ მანამდე არ წამოვედი.
After the images of Zviad being beaten go viral, the protesters hope it will lead to consequences for the police officers. It doesn't. After the assault, Zviad returns to Rustaveli Avenue.
I continue going to the protest, but not as usual as I used to. You know, those after this time, I had some post-traumatic things. I was there, and I was more scared than I would be before.
6 months after the violent attack, Zviad is still waiting for someone to be held accountable.
I don't know the names of those police officers. These police officers are just doing fine. I don't expect to receive justice at all.
You must have seen the videos of the brutal way in which the police have treated some of the protesters in the last few days. What is your reaction to that?
Investigation will happen against this kind of incidents, but also in this case, it's important to have a clear position with regard to the violence from both sides.
Zviad is not alone. There are no reports of any investigations into several hundred cases of alleged police violence.
მინდა ვისარგებლო შემთხვევიდან ყველა პოლიციელს, შინაგან საქმეთა სამინისტროს თანამშრომელს მადლობა გადავუხადო.
Even more galling for the protesters, some police officers who took part in the crackdown are rewarded with a Medal of Honor, including Irakli's former boss, Khareba, the chief of the riot police.
Policies polkovnik Zviad Kharazishvili.
ახალისება გაუკეთეს დანარჩენ პოლიციის თანამშრომლებსაც და თუ თქვენც ესეთ დამსახურებულად შეასრულებთ ამ დავალებებს, თქვენს გელოდებათ სახელმწიფო ჯილდოები.
After his resignation in December last year, Irakli publicly criticizes the actions of the police. He says they tried to silence him with threats to his family.
პიროვნებები მომიგზავნეს პიროვნული შემოთვლებით. ანუ შემთხვევით შეიძლება შენ შვილს მანქანა დაეჯახოს, ოდესაც სკოლიდან წამოვა. რა შემთხვევით შენ შვილს ანუ ხდებით ანუ და არიან წამსვლელები, ხდები ამ სიბინძურეს, იმიტომ რომ ბინძური ადამიანები არიან გონებითაც, მორალითაც და ზნეობითაც.
Irakli and his family settle in the United States and apply for political asylum. He is the highest-ranking police defector.
რო ვიხსენებ, გონია რომ რაღაცა სიზმარი იყო და რაღაცა ისე მოხდა იქ. ეს იყო ჩვეულებრივი ჯოჯოხეთი დედამიწაზე.
You were in charge and this thing was still happening. Why didn't you stop it?
და მე მესმის აბსოლუტურად. გარკვეული აგრესიაც მესმის და მათი განწყობაც. რატომ არ მიიღე გადაწყვეტილება და რატო დაუშვათ არ წამოხვედი? ან მანამდე რატო არ დატოვე სისტემა? ერთი ზუსტად ვიცი, რომ იდეალური არ ვარ, მაგრამ არასოდეს გარეწარი არ ყოფილვარ და თამამად შემიძლია ჩემს შვილებს თვალებში ჩავხედო და უთხრა, რომ მამამისი არაზროს არ ყოფილა ისეთი, როგორიც იმ პერიოდში ის სისტემა იყო.
While the pro-EU rallies in the street continue, Konstantin, the pediatric doctor and protester, is back in his clinic in central Tbilisi, and he has made a breakthrough. He's just finished his study on the health impacts of exposure to chemicals used during the protests.
ვინც ნიღაბს იყენებდა, ისიც ვერ დაიცვა, კარგად და რეალურად, ბოლომდე ამ გართულებებისგან ვერ დაიცვა რა.
His suspicions are confirmed. Crucially, there have been some long-term effects beyond 30 days for nearly half of the participants in the study. In some cases, Konstantin notices worrying changes in the heart and lungs too.
We also identified that there was enlarged T waves, which might be due to hypoxia, which means that heart is receiving lack of oxygen and the changes in the right atrium. We also identified that in long-term effects, some people had vomiting, nausea, and shortness of breath as well. We can definitely say that the symptoms occurred after the exposure. And some of the symptoms persisted beyond 30 days beyond the exposure, which is a concerning sign, obviously.
Konstantin's study was accepted for publication to an international academic journal. But his study hasn't identified the precise chemical compounds used in the water cannons. The authorities have always referred to it only as gas or other special measures.
იყენებდით თუ არა წყლის ჭაულს და გაზს ერთობლივად აქციის მონაწილეების წინააღმდეგ.
არ შეგიძლია გამოიყენო, არ შეუძლია სპეცნას გამოიყენოს. თუ არის პატარა ბავშვები, რა თქმა უნდა, არასრულწლოვანები, თუ არის ფეხმძიმე ქალები და ასე შემდეგ. თუ ხდება შეტევა და შტურმი ხდება, შეგიძლია გამოიყენო ერთდროულად გაზიც, წყალიც და სხვა სპეცსაშუალებების. კი ბატონო, მე შევიტანე პირადად.
What we can reveal for the first time, with the help of another former police insider, is the name and the makeup of the chemicals that we believe were used against the protesters. This second whistleblower is another former member of the Special Tasks Department.
მე ამის შესახებ არასდროს არ ვსაუბრობდი ღიად.
Lasha Shergelashvili is now in Ukraine's army, fighting against the Russian forces. He claims to know exactly what was being deployed in Georgia.
მოდის პირველი ტომა, რომელიც ასხავს წყლის ჭაულს, მე პირადად არ შემიძლია დავადგინო. როდესაც ვხედავ წყლის ჭაულს, მასში შერეულია თუ არა ქიმიკატები.
Lasha knows the equipment used by the riot police better than most. A highly decorated officer, he worked for the riot police for more than 20 years. He served as head of weaponry until 2022, his last role.
ჩემი იქ მსახურობის დროს მე ვიცოდი ყველაფერი რაც მქონდა. ვიცოდი ყველა ის საშუალება, ყველა ის საბრძოლო მასალა, ყველა ის იარაღი.
He followed the events closely when the protests began in Tbilisi.
კადრები მახსოვს, მამაკაცი რომელიც გამორბის ყვირისთან რომ რაღაც არის შერეული წყალში. მე მაშინვე მივხვდი რომ ეს იყო სწორედ ის სითხე, რაზეც ჩვენ ვსაუბრობდით.
He says that some of the water cannons used on Rustaveli Avenue were purchased in 2009. At the time, he says, he was asked to test a chemical mixture for the water cannons that then turned out to be 10 times stronger than regular tear gas.
რაც შეეხება ქიმიურ სითხეს, რომელიც შედგება ორი კომპონენტისაგან, 34-39 ქიმიური ფხვნილი და 17-10 ქიმიური სითხე. მომზადების პროცესში მე რაც ამაქვს ნანახი, ესენი იყო 20 ლიტრიანი ჭურჭელი, ხოლო ქიმიური ფხვნილი იყო პლასმასის ლიტრიანი ბანკები. ხოლო რაც ყველაზე მეტად მომხვდა თვალში, თავის ქალა, ჩონჩხი და ძვლები. ქიმიური სითხის ტესტირება ჩვენ ჩავატარეთ, მაშინვე მალევე, როდესაც ეს მივიღეთ, ეს გამოიწვია იმაში, რომ დაახლოებით 2-მა მაგალითად, ანუ გული აერიათ და არ წყიეს. მათ შორის ახლოში ვიდექი მეც მაინტერესებდა, რომ საკუთარ თავზე გამომეცა და შევეცდები უბრალოდ ავღწერო.
გააქვს წვა, თვალების წვა, სულ თქვა გიჭირს. ანუ შენ თუ გას დაუშვა წიწაკის გას სუნთქავ პირს გააღებ და სუნთქავ შენ შეგიძლია ეს გადაიტანო, მაგრამ ამ ქიმიური სითხის შემთხვევაში არ შემიძლია ანალოგიური საშუალება მოვიყვანო მის ეფექტთან დაკავშირებით.
Was there a code of secrecy around what the chemicals were as well?
ეს ადამიანები არიან თიცე ჩამოსათვლელი ადამიანები, ვინც ამის შესახებ იცოდნენ.
Lasha says he warned against the use of these chemicals while he was in his post, but his advice was ignored. He says they were still added into the tanks of the water cannons, and they were there throughout his tenure until 2022. The BBC has obtained a copy of the inventory of the Special Tasks Department, a highly confidential document from this period. We verified its authenticity. The two chemicals Lasha mentions are listed here, along with a recipe on how they should be mixed. Lasha says he stayed in contact with former colleagues who confirmed to him that the same chemicals were still being used on Rustaveli Avenue in the protests of 2024. The BBC spoke with several other former high-ranking officers who confirmed the existence of the chemicals and the protocols for their deployment.
So I do worry about what chemical was used. It's just interesting the chemicals that the UN numbers are associated with.
The chemical numbers don't tell you everything. So we asked Professor Holstig to help us understand what they are. He's a world-leading expert in toxicology and chemical weapons who has been asked by governments around the world to work on major poisoning cases.
It's a puzzle. What is it that they put into the water that actually was sprayed, and what kind of evidence do we have that might help us to narrow the playing field of what chemicals were put into it? And so I was intrigued at the case.
The first chemical, a liquid, is easily identified. UN 1710 is trichloroethylene, or TCE. It's a solvent which helps other chemicals dissolve in water.
So trichloroethylene is absorbed very well through the skin, through the lungs, and through the gastrointestinal tract. It impacts the nervous system, the cardiovascular system, can affect the liver. It is certainly not a chemical that I want thrown out to the masses during protests. And it's all about the dose that makes the poison. And the higher the dose, the more risk there is of complications. So you have a chemical in a high pressure device. So if I'm close to that water cannon, there's not only the concern about getting this aerosol on people's skin or inhaling it, they can also ingest it. So if I'm hit by this spray, there's a chance I can get a pretty big mouthful and swallow that. I worry about that significantly as a toxicologist.
Identifying the second compound, the powder, is a tougher challenge. UN 3439 is a class of chemicals. The goal for Professor Holstig and his colleague Dr. Sandra Nixon is to narrow down the possibilities. They looked at our research, Konstantin's medical study, witness statements, and human rights reports. Based on our evidence, they now have a hypothesis.
But it's so toxic that it really doesn't even make sense for them to use it because it, stays around for a long time and people can't even be in the area. And that was written by a chemist in Italy all the way back in 1939.
No, and I think it's disturbing if we're starting to see agents that were used in World War I that have been obsolete, that we don't have any modern data and you can't actually even Google it.
Their favorite theory is that it is a chemical agent called camite, or Ca. It was first used as a chemical weapon by French forces against the Germans at the end of World War I. It was then briefly used by American police as a riot control agent, but soon abandoned and replaced with safer options.
I've never seen camite being utilized in modern society. Camite was developed around the time of World War I. and was utilized, very effective as a riot control agent or an irritant substance. Camite is markedly irritating, persistent with its irritation, potential for causing more problems with your lungs, coughing, for example, potentially pneumonias. Not clear, even if you drink some of this, what kind of symptoms you're going to have gastrointestinal, including vomiting. I think the question then comes, why would you utilize it? And part of it is the persistence. It would keep people away for a long time. They couldn't decontaminate. They would have to go to the hospital. They would have to leave the area. If that is indeed the case, that this chemical has been brought back, that is actually exceedingly dangerous.
We don't know the exact dosages or how often the chemicals were added, but what we do know is that the water cannons were deployed against thousands who'd taken to the streets during the first 7 days of the protests. We showed our findings to the UN's Special Rapporteur on Torture.
The important point at international law is that any effects should be temporary. So longer-term problems such as long-term respiratory issues or related to heart conditions, these are beyond what would be considered temporary and acceptable. So all of those cases should be investigated, including under the rubric of torture or other ill treatment.
The lack of strict regulation around the use of chemicals in the water cannons is a problem the UN's Special Rapporteur on Torture would like to be addressed.
How I would describe the water cannons infused with different toxins as entirely unnecessary. Given that it is poorly regulated internationally, it does lead me to consider it as an experimental weapon, and populations should never be subjected to experiments. This is absolutely in violation of human rights law.
The ruling party, the Georgian Dream, described the allegation that unknown chemicals had been added to the water cannons as deeply frivolous and absurd. It said that law enforcement had acted within the bounds of the law and constitution when responding to the illegal actions of brutal criminals. Meanwhile, the crackdown on dissent intensifies.
Nearly all leaders of Georgia's pro-Western opposition are now behind bars. It's part of a crackdown on dissent, they say.
Those who oppose the government now face the growing threat of Russian-style authoritarian tactics. Gela's party leader is one of those jailed. Gela was there on the day to support him. And it's not just the party leaders. Many of Gela's activist friends are in prison too. One of them wrote to him.
ბრძოლა არ შეწყვეტოთ სანამ თქვენი ბრძოლით პატიმრებით წვრთნებით გითხრებით. ხო, ეგ არის, მაგას ვამბობ. ხო, ამის მე ძალიან რთულია რომ ხო, ეგ არის. დაიკიდე და ეხა ამ მომენტში ეგ არის ძალიან. მე გააზრებული მაქვს რომ მართლა შეიძლება გავხდე პოლიტპატიმარი, შეიძლება დღესაც, საღამოსაც, ხვალად, ამას ვერ გავთვლი ვერანაირად. გახსნა არ არის ზედაპირული დათვალიერება. ზედაპირული
Gela's profile as an activist is increasing. It's not long before he's stopped again by the police.
გავიგე, ანუ ჩემ გარდა უამრავი ადამიანია ჩანთი და ჩემი ჩანთა რატო გახდა თქო საინტერესო.
The incident is filmed by a local crew. The next day in court, he learns he will serve 12 days in solitary confinement. Tamaroniani is often at the tribunal supporting protesters like Gela. As a result, Many human rights organizations, including hers, have been targeted with new legislation.
Since November 28, we have witnessed that the protest and all the forms affiliated with the protest are targets of the repressions. So these laws target not only civil society organizations, like in the form of NGOs, but everyone in Georgia. And if our work will not continue, it means that there will be less and less possibility for the citizens to find justice.
The government is now forcing NGOs to formally declare themselves as foreign agents if their funding is from abroad. If they refuse, they can end up in prison.
We are, as Transparency International, we will be closing in several months' time. The goal of the government to shut down the civil society, NGOs, the independent media, and we might have the same like in Russia.
In a further echo of the Russian playbook, the Georgian authorities are handing out hefty fines to everyday protesters. Thousands have received them. Tamta is one of them.
ხალხი ვერ გატეხა ვერც ფიზიკურმა ძალადობამ, ფინანსურმა ძალადობამ ჯარიმებს გულისხმობ და როგორც ხედავთ, მაინც ვდგავართ.
She's been out of work since quitting as a police officer and faces nearly $4,000 in fines.
ცხოვრობ ისე როგორც კარგი მოქალაქე, კარგი პოლიციელი და ძალიან მწყინს, რომ დღეს სამართალდამღების სტატუსი მაქვს, მაგრამ დადგება პერიოდი, როდესაც საამაყო იქნება ის ჯარიმები, რომლებიც ჩვენ ახლა სწორი პოზიციისთვის გვაქვს მიღებული.
Those who fail to pay the fines could also end up in prison. Some cases have already been reported.
They want Georgia to become the #1 ally of Russia, but there will be no one on the ground who will resist and who will say no.
And who's to blame for that?
The Georgian government and one man, Bidzina Ivanishvili.
So is this where accountability ultimately lies for the government clampdown of the last year? Is this shadowy figure, Bidzina Ivanishvili, an oligarch worth billions, the one pulling Georgia towards the Kremlin's influence, as his opponents believe? Here he is seen with the Prime Minister celebrating last year's election victory for the party he founded. He doesn't officially run the government. His role is solely as an advisor, and he denies any connection to the Kremlin. But this man, his former personal financier, thinks he knows better.
He was the main person after every single political decision.
They met over a decade ago in Moscow, where Bidzina Ivanishvili made his fortune.
Camera 1 is recording, camera 2 is recording.
We tracked down George Bachashvili to the UAE. He's in hiding here after falling out with his former boss.
I can say that I was in the residence very often, at least twice a week. I would either see judges, prosecutors, or ministers of internal affairs or the heads of the state security agencies. He was the person appointing the highest level government members. So regardless of Ivanishvili was in power or if he was not in power officially, all of those people would take orders directly through him.
George says his former boss is the one directing the events of the last year from above.
From what I can see, of how these protests are being dealt with, I can definitely feel that none of these actions can be made without Ivanishvili's personal approval.
So what has the international community's response been to the events of the last year in Georgia? The crowds are demanding action.
Maybe Georgia is a small country, but whatever we are doing is a big thing for everyone around the world. Because in fact, we are resisting Russia's influence and Russia here.
The West responds with a long list of sanctions on judges, police officers, and ministers who are accused of undermining democracy and violating human rights. But what about the man at the top? In the West, only the US sanctioned Bidzina Ivanishvili for enabling human rights abuses during the protests and undermining democracy for the benefit of Russia. The streets celebrate, but they ask for more. He remains unsanctioned by the EU and the UK. After his 12 days in solitary confinement, for Gela, it's Freedom Day. His case will be taken to the European Court of Human Rights for arbitrary detention. Gela's back on the streets the same day. For a year now, night after night, Rustaveli Avenue has been blocked by protesters.
ხანდახან არის ხოლმე მომენტები, როცა ნიჰილისტური განწყობა მეუფლება და არის ფიქრები, რომ აქვს თუ არა აზრი საერთოდ იმას, რასაც ვაკეთებ. ეს გრძელდება რამოდენიმე წუთი და შემდეგ ეს ემოცია ქრება.
იმ იდეისთვის, რომელიც ჩვენ გვაქვს, ყველაფერი ღირს. თუნდაც ჩემი თავისუფლების აღკვეთ.
Deep down, I know that things are gonna get way worse than before they got better.
But to many, it seems the country is slipping deeper into authoritarian rule. Without pause and unchecked.